Hey, the 50 nutrients that I always mention that vegans don't get in their diet don't even matter essentially. I only said it so they get a grasp of what's going on, because it's much harder for them to understand that all animals are made out of meat and fat, meaning that they need to get it from somewhere to build their bodies. That's how you are born into this realm, and that's how you become a baby, teenager, adult. You always need more of these building blocks, which are cholesterol, saturated animal fat, and meat. And as we have learned, all animals eat a ketogenic diet, but not all animals eat mostly meat. Some animals eat mostly plants. So how does that work? The plant-eating animals have bacteria in their stomachs or colon where they ferment the plants. And usually this involves eating your own vomit and crap, but of course they have completely different senses than us carnivores, and they get pleasure out of that. They do this so they can get the nutrients that the bacteria produced by feeding on the plants that they swallowed, so they don't even digest it themselves. If a gorilla was here and would eat these plants, they would really enjoy it. But we know that we hate eating natural plants.
Hiroshi Moriyama is 43. He experienced sudden chest pains and had to be hospitalized immediately. Doctors diagnosed him with a myocardial infarction. It happens when part of the heart muscle dies. This is an X-ray of Moriyama's heart. The blackish lines are blood vessels. The bloodstream, which should normally be continuous, has been blocked. His arteries were hardened, and his blood vessels got clogged. None of the medical examinations Moriyama had until then had turned up any indications of heart problems. What Moriyama's physician told him was something unexpected.
おそらく食事を食べた後に非常に血糖が急激に上昇するような状況、血糖スパイクとかも言いますけども。
Glucose spike is the culprit behind the clogging of his vital arteries.
血糖値が高いことが結局心臓に来たことがやっぱり驚きですね。
Not only did more animal fat in the diet mean considerably more energy, it was also a source of ready-made long-chain fatty acids, including the 20 and 22 carbon chain fatty acids, arachidonic acid, docosahexaenoic acid, and docosahexaenoic acid, which are together make up over 90% of the fatty acids found in the brain matter of all mammalian species. This again is highly significant because 20 and 22 carbon fatty acids are essential for brain development, and they are not found in vegetable fats. The longest chain in any vegetable oils are linoleic acid, which is the omega-6 EFA, and alpha-linolenic acid, which is the omega-3. But these are only 18 carbon fatty acids. Now, we do have an ability, just like all mammals, to chain elongate and desaturate these to produce the longer chain fatty acids, but we're not very good at it. I'm quoting here from a study, humans maintain an inefficient ability to chain elongate and desaturate 18 carbon fatty acids to their product 20 and 22 carbon fatty acids.
The cells of the interior wall of a blood vessel are used in an experiment. They are alternately soaked in a solution with a lot of glucose and in a solution with only a little to create the condition of glucose levels skyrocketing repeatedly. A scientist uses a special microscope to look at the samples. The blood vessel cells are glowing red. A potentially harmful substance called reactive oxygen is produced in large quantities. 2 weeks later, 42% of the cells have died because of the reactive oxygen. That's the cause of the high occurrence of hardening of the arteries. When glucose levels rise sharply, reactive oxygen is produced in large quantities in cells. This substance damages the cells. Then, when the cells try to repair themselves, immune cells are attached to the artery walls and are absorbed into them. The artery walls swell and become narrow in those places. That's how the arteries become hardened. Other research has shown that people who have glucose spikes have a 1.9 times greater risk of suffering a heart attack or a stroke because of hardening of the arteries.
These animals don't require the amino acids in their diet because the bacteria literally build their bodies, so they are naturally healthy as they are supposed to be. And that's how it is for all animals. As long as we follow nature, we will always be healthy. Our large intestine is very small. It produces 2% of our energy at best. This has been scientifically proven, and it only works if it's full of rotting plants. Most of them we shit out to feed the soil. It's the circle of life. Is it worth getting colon cancer just to produce a little bit of saturated animal fat? It's not even enough for survival. If you would rely on that, it would be suicide. If you went vegan because something clicked in your head when they told you that vegetables, grains, and fruit are healthy, then you've been programmed. The government has been telling you this over and over again since you were a child. Eat plants and avoid cholesterol. But all animal cells are made out of cholesterol. So they indirectly told you as a baby to go vegan. And you fucking fell for it. They tell you the opposite of the truth. To ruin your health. The biggest irony about this is that all of the nutrients that vegans try to avoid, the body does everything it can to produce them. It turns the carbohydrates into saturated animal fat in the liver, and after a while you get fatty liver disease.
So, have we got a large gut? Well, no. Quite the reverse, in fact. Using Kleiber's law, we find that our gut is actually much smaller than would be expected in an animal of our size. Our stomach, for example, is only about a third as big as would be expected. Our small intestine is only 3/4, and that's where most of the food is absorbed. Our cecum is practically non-existent. You can see it there. We call it an appendix, about the size of a little finger. And our colon is only just over half what would be expected. Now, all of these values are considerably less than 1. Now, this is particularly obvious in the case of the cecum. The cecum is part of the gut between the small and large intestines, which is present in all mammals, but with differing sizes depending on the mammal's natural food supply. Hindgut digesters, like the gorilla, have a large cecum, hosting billions of bacteria which break down plant materials such as cellulose. Exclusive carnivores, whose diets contain little or no plant material, have a much smaller cecum, often partially or wholly replaced by the vermiform, as it's called, appendix. And this is the case in humans. This is quite obvious when we compare the gorilla with the man in the picture I've got there. Look at the size of the gorilla's abdomen compared with a man's. This is because the gorilla's large abdomen is mostly cecum and colon, which in humans is very small. As a consequence, we absorb very little nutrition from our colons.
This is a crime. Based on the current recommendations for protein intake, 40% of Americans aren't getting enough protein. Okay? And if you want to talk about a war on women, most females over the age of 8 aren't getting enough protein. And the problem is worse because they're equating plant protein with animal protein. So the number's worse than this. We knew a long time ago that animal protein was superior to plant protein, but that's kind of awkward when we start recommending plant-based diets, right? That's kind of awkward. So we just ignore that. Crude protein is the percent nitrogen determined by analysis multiplied by 6.25 because we assume that all the nitrogen present is in protein and we assume that all the protein is 16% nitrogen. Right? That's how we get that number.
People experiencing glucose spikes are 1.6 times more likely to have Alzheimer's-type cognitive impairment. The key culprit is amyloid beta protein, a waste deposit that builds up in the brain and is considered to be behind Alzheimer's. People susceptible to glucose spikes often have diminished cell capacity to absorb glucose. When that happens, the pancreas releases large amounts of insulin to decrease the amount of sugar in the bloodstream. When it's transported to the brain, this insulin becomes troublesome. Normally, a certain type of enzyme breaks down amyloid beta protein. However, when large amounts of insulin flow into the brain, this enzyme breaks down the insulin before the amyloid beta. The intact amyloid beta accumulates in the brain. The nerve cells then die, and this promotes dementia. Moreover, when a glucose spike occurs, cells generate great amounts of reactive oxygen. This reactive oxygen damages DNA within cells in the body, creating a 1.5 times greater risk of cancer. Glucose spikes really are the source of serious illnesses.
Fruitarians, for example, get a lot of saturated animal fat at first because they turn the fructose into it, but after a while the body can't handle it anymore. And that's generally how it is with vegans. They quit quite quickly. The organs don't want to do it, the deficiencies start kicking in, and you can see how long-term vegans look like, if there was such a thing, seeing as it got popular in 2010. People say that they look worse than people on chemotherapy, and I'll have to agree with that. Seeing as over 90% of Europeans are on a plant-based diet with very little fat, transitioning to veganism is just a more extreme version of how they already eat. And some can gain weight at first because they overeat, seeing as they are malnourished, and try to get nutrients where they will never find them. But for the most part, emaciation is what will follow, because the organs can only do it for so long. And they will call that health, because all of your life you've been told that weight loss is healthy. You're cannibalizing yourself. Peace, guys.